Tell you what, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Officer Lizer, if you want to come up to the table, I'll just make a few opening remarks, and we'll go ahead and get started. We got, I know, 4 men that have real jobs. Thank you, Shane, for being here.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for your 22 years of service to the city, not only within the police department, but within the fire department as well. Noted you had, I believe, 11 years of service. Yes, with them, so thank you for applying. The process will be this. We will interview the 4 applicants that we've received all today consecutively. The council members have submitted questions. We've consolidated them, and we'll probably go in rapid fire order, 1 through 5. If we have time at the end, we will then maybe ask some questions that we weren't prepared to ask you based on, you know, answers that we've received from you. Understand that we may choose an interim chief as early as Monday night at our council meeting. We will have an executive session following these interviews to discuss, you know, your responses and just get a general idea. We can't vote in an executive session, but the process will be, hopefully, we can, over the next few days, make up our mind and name an interim chief on Monday. The interim chief will serve for up to 6 months as an interim chief. We may choose to make the interim chief the permanent police chief at any time within those 6 months, but not beyond those 6 months. If you're selected as interim chief, you will maintain your current salary until such time as you were to be named chief, in which time you would be elevated to the grade of police chief. One of the reasons why we did it that way was, it may not sound fair, but is we didn't want to give somebody a pay cut after a month or 2 or 3 or 6. So we just had decided to keep it the same. So do you have any questions about the process? If you were chosen, the reason we give you 6 months is if you decide the job is not for you, you can step back into the job that you had prior to being interim chief. There's no penalties. There's no ill will. It's, you know, it's to give you time to evaluate the job and to give us time to evaluate the job that you would be performing.
Yes.
Understood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments before we get going? Okay. I'll go ahead and I'll start the questioning then. Officer Lizer, would you please share with me your vision for the Fairhope Police Department?
I'd like to see the department grow. I know it's something that don't happen overnight, but over a period of time to bring the work staff to a higher level, to more officers on the street, a few more investigators, the traffic division, warrant division, for something that we have a lot of warrants that need to be worked on a lot more than it kind of goes outside the ability of patrol sometimes, where based off where they live, that's not local. Just basically expanding the department, making it better and more wanting to work for and be there for, and be able to bring more people in at one time in the future, near future.
All right. Thank you, sir. Councilman Conyers?
Yes, sir. Officer Lizer, if you could just give us your definition of leadership and also an example of a situation where you are able to resolve an issue or conflict using your leadership skills.
Leadership, you know, be able to guide the officers, you know, or subordinates below me into the right direction of doing something, handling a case or a situation in the right direction within the laws and guidelines of city laws, local and federal, trying to do the right thing, handling a situation of my own, kind of hard to come up with something, but just trying to think of something for that.
We're kind of hitting you on the spot with.
Yeah, you deal with so many different things. You just start mixing it all up. You kind of it's hard to put something together. There's many situations that I've handled get to the saying, you got to assess everything at the time and be able to walk through it at that time and come up with a conclusion to resolve it peacefully without any kind of incident or an arrest if possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Brown?
Shane, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Like Jack said, thank you for your service to the city. I've kind of got a two-part. First, what are your thoughts on promoting from within the department? I guess both interim and full-time.
As in the chief or any type
correct,
of position?
as a chief.
I think it's a good thing for the people that's worked there. Gives them an opportunity to have a goal to work for one day to build up to. Just like in my case, to start out as a patrolman one day and had the goal one day of becoming that corporal or sergeant, and hopefully one day maybe a lieutenant in chief. I think it's a good thing to give the opportunity to the men and women inside that department first before going outside.
And that goes for a permanent chief as well?
Yes, if all possible, yes.
All right, so kind of the second part of my question, I'm on the bike ped committee, and we take, the safety of bikers and pedestrians, but along that same line is the safety of people and even drivers in downtown Fairhope. I think we're all aware downtown is getting more crowded, more traffic, more people. Who, in your opinion, who has the leadership to make that change? Should that be driven by the police force? Should that be the city council? Should that be the mayor and her staff?
Well, the general position of the chief is public safety. It should be, work together between the council, staff, mayor, and the city with the chief to come up with a good conclusion to actually make a safe path or area for the cyclists or walkers.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Boone?
Shane, looking back on your career, what event or accomplishment are you most proud of during that 22 years you've been here?
Am I proud of? Can't think of an event, but being here and serving the public of the city, assisting anybody in any needs they've done. I've enjoyed working the years here, working the events that we've had, speaking and meeting with the public, just out walking, especially like arts and crafts downtown. You're walking with everybody. You get stopped, questioned every day by somebody, whether it's something nice or whether something you don't want to run into, but you got to deal with it as you go. A particular event, it's occasion that's happened with me, I'd not really, some things are hard to dig up in that much in your time. I was recognized one time as for Officer of the Month back 2010. When an incident took place, I'd actually had surgery on my foot, was back on light duty, actually headed back to, I'd left early for work, going back to physical therapy, and on the way there had a complete field that was on fire, and all the mobile homes that were down there off 32 were in jeopardy of that fire, and several of them was at the back door. And I was beating door to door, getting people out, trying to get fire department responding, and I left from going to my therapy, helping them people instead of going to therapy for myself. I look back at that several times, for doing that. I'm sure there's many other incidents, but not on top of my head right this second.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Robinson?
Officer Lizer, I again appreciate you being here and appreciate your service. Despite our recent rapid growth, I still consider Fairhope to be a small town and a small community. And so I'd like to know what the term community policing means to you, and then how you would implement community policing if you were to be the interim chief.
Well, community policing is almost like basically what it says, is getting the community involved in helping in their particular neighborhoods, watching those areas, keeping anything suspicious, contacting the local police of any kind of suspicious things going on. I'm all for community policing. It helps the police department because sometimes our eyes can't be at the same place all the time. It's a proven fact. We're going to have to be somewhere else at different times besides being at that location. Having people out there watching and keeping up besides what we're doing helps us out to be able to get a better response and getting somebody there that's pretty close or, in that manner. I'm all for making that happen.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Officer Lizer, much has been stated and written and said over the last, few years about the police department budget and who should control it. And in your first answer, you said you'd like to grow the department. And I can see where you'd want to do that sometimes. Let's say we have a situation where we need to cut the police department budget by 10%. How would you do that? How would you accomplish a 10% budget cut if that should become necessary?
Well, I'd have to see what the budget allows me to, where I can actually make the cuts, to whether it's in vehicles or be able to. It's something I'd have to actually look back to see what the transition from each year of the budget shows to where I could actually work from, and what would be the best opportunity to cut from, whether it's from vehicles, cutting back on some of the vehicles, any particular equipment, chairs or something that's for the department. If we can make some other old chairs work or an older car last another year, I'd be willing to cut that. Training is not something that's real good to cut into, but every bit of it would be an area of it to look at, to whether it needs to be modified or not.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, sir. Councilman Conyers?
Yes, living in Fairhope, we're fortunate to live in such a wonderful small town, but from a public safety, law enforcement perspective, what is the biggest challenge facing towns like Fairhope today, in your opinion?
Biggest challenge probably is going to be growth, because the more we grow, the more the crime rate comes in that we've got to work to keep down. The congestion of traffic. I think growth would be probably the biggest thing, because growth's going to lead into a lot of other things.
All right. Drugs in the community. What would you see as a way to address the illegal drugs that are in our schools and community?
Drugs.
Are we doing enough?
There's probably, I'm sure there's a lot more out there that we can do. It's just trying to find what it is. The problem with drugs today, there's a lot of drugs that are getting out here that do not work with certain test kits, are not as recognized as other older drugs that are out there we're so used to seeing. They change every day. We have to find new ways to work around it and to deal with each new type of drug that's coming in. There's drugs out there today that haven't even got into this area yet. Thankfully, some of them are very deadly. Extremely deadly. It would be a big focus. I believe in having some kind of a drug task force that actually works on dealing with strictly those situations, and over time to be able to get something like that to where you have one or two guys starting, finding out where it's coming in, be able to work those people, and with the laws of what Alabama and the federal laws allow us to do. It would be it's definitely something that has to be worked, especially in the schools. Try to implement more program, working on school resource now. Having that hopefully is some kind of a deterrent. They'll see more while they're in the schools.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Boone?
Shane, if you were appointed police chief, how long do you think you could stay in that position, or what are your further aspirations do you have? What other further police aspirations do you have?
I'm willing to be there until whenever y'all get tired of it, or it's time for retirement, but I have no grounds anytime soon to be leaving. My plans are to stick around as long as I can, as long as the service will allow me, and health-wise too.
22 years kind of shows that, doesn't
Made it this far. Made it this far with and a couple horses, so some of y'all know about that anyway. They didn't stop me, I'll put it that way.
That it? Councilman Boone, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, all right. Councilman Robinson?
Yes, sir. You know, based on, going back on your 22 years' experience in law enforcement, what do you think uniquely qualifies you to serve as the police chief in Fairhope?
Well, 22 years of performing this duty in this department, you know, protecting the citizens, the city of Fairhope, upholding all the laws, and the experience of time and years of going through schools, which I have a list of certificate courses that I've been through since 1994, besides the police academy, corrections academy, experience out here on the streets dealing day in and day out. I feel that it's a big lead into where I'm trying to go.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. Councilman, we've gone through the questions that you've submitted. There were some additional questions, but I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to just open it up to each of you to ask whatever else that you may have thought of during this interview, or any other questions that you may have thought of since you submitted your questions. Kind of a catch-all here, Officer Lizer. Are there any unique initiatives or ideas that you have for the police department if you were to be named chief? And please be specific if you can.
Well, if I'm picked and appointed into this position in the future, well, once it's if it becomes a full-time position, I believe in trying to grow the department. One is trying to slowly try to bring in personnel little by little over time. One of our biggest thing is right now is we are limited on space in our department. We're getting kind of squeezed in there. It's having a precinct that for the past several years, Chief Lieutenant Hamrick has been working on to give us some more space, maybe move patrol into possibly investigations to give more administration into this building up here. Also, you know, as I said earlier, I'd like to see more officers, that we have a better patrol, bigger patrol, gives us more coverage when we have more on the street. Having a traffic division that gets out here, works the traffic, where patrol is actually working, answering these calls, because the call rate goes up. You know, over time, as growth, the call rate does start going up little by little. And they stay busy with different calls, from whether it's somebody's cat walking across somebody's yard or to a theft, burglary of some kind. Covering 88 square miles, sometimes it takes a lot for officers to stretch themselves out to answer these calls. So having more on patrol, and then having the traffic working, speeding areas, stop signs, school zone, anything like that. And then eventually having a drug task force, maybe 1 to 2 guys starting it out, to be able to work on the drugs, to hit these problem areas. They'd also be able to work on some of the warrants as well while doing that. And then eventually in the future, maybe trying to add a few more into the investigations to help them out with the crime rate reports and calls that they have to go on every day and deal with, that the patrol can't always, you know, follow up on. Sometimes the cases involve an investigator to actually take on, because it's so lengthy and so many people you have to take time out to go speak with witnesses wise. Patrol just can't do that every minute because they have calls they have to go answer for the public. And things like that, just trying to make the department better, but it's going to take a period of time to do it. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Council members, I know that there were a few other questions that you had submitted, but I'd ask you now that if you have any other questions that are off script that you would like to ask now, please feel free to ask them. Anyone of you.
I'd like to actually ask the one I had on script.
Absolutely.
Which I think is very pertinent. We've got 4 great candidates for this position. Obviously, we can only choose one. So if appointed, if selected, how would you go about maintaining the unity among the three that aren't selected as well as within the entire police department?
Out of the other three that wouldn't be selected, if I were to be picked, well, it's a gamble that we take with each other. You know, I understand that the other three are doing the same thing I'm sitting here doing right now. We know at the end that only one of us is going to take that position. Any animosity between each other, I would try to work that out, resolve it between each and one of them if there is. I have no heart against any one of them, any one of the other three to get it over me. They get it over me. Been here 22 years. I'll continue going just like I am. I'm just here to try to make things better than what it may be if it is worse, to move forward. One of us has got to do it. If the chief decided to retire, which he's done, then me or one of the other three just going to have to continue the business. Still a daily operation that has to continue regardless. But I would make sure if I was picked for it, I would make sure things are right between the four of us. Make sure that, there's no animosity between anybody and just continue going.
Shane, you've talked about growth in the department and really from sort of a ground-up approach, for different units, traffic, patrol, and warrants and certain other things. I'd like to know more about your vision as what you see the needs are or what your vision would be for the top of the department. Right now we have a chief and three lieutenants. Would you see the need to change that? What would your thoughts be on sort of the top of the department and what its structure should look like?
I think there should be, under the chief, you should at least have an assistant chief or a captain, at a minimum of one captain. With your three lieutenants, I think the positions that are there currently now are fine, just like they are. You got different divisions that you'd have lieutenants over. I think that with a captain or an assistant chief, you've got that person to actually help you make sure your daily operations are being ran while the chief's trying to run the business and keeping up with the department of what's going on. Each supervisor under them, their subordinates under them should be performing their duties of what they're supposed to do, all the way down to a corporal, to making sure that corporal's making sure that everybody's doing the patrol's doing their job, sergeant make sure the corporal's following up with his, besides below him, and the lieutenant's down just like that. And a captain or assistant chief is a good thing to have for one or two others. Now, whether it's multiple captains, that would be something that need to be seen in a later date. I think just one at the time being would be sufficient enough for the time to make sure daily operations are still functioning. The chief himself has a lot on his hands dealing with the city government to the laws to everything else that he might have to look into and deal with other complaints about what the public sees out there with themselves that wants to speak to the chief.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to go back to, talking about the safety of downtown. You mentioned the chief is overall public safety. That's his number one goal. And speeding. Yesterday I was sitting at the gas station there at Rambo's, and this probably 30-year-old woman drove by, if I had to guess, probably 50 or 60 miles an hour and crossed Morphy coming into downtown. I pulled out of there and tried to track her down, but I couldn't catch her. That just irritates the you-know-what out of me, to see people coming into town like that. Fairhope, you're supposed to slow down, enjoy life. What ideas do you have to help control the downtown? What I see is an issue. Somebody's going to get killed, whether car to car or pedestrian car situation.
I think the biggest thing is where traffic comes in or any officers available to be able to sit there and work those areas a lot stronger. A speed trailer, I know our current speed trailer we have is out of commission at this time. I think they were working on something. I'm not kind of in that part no more at this time, but I know they were working on something of the fact of another speed trailer or something. But having that device worked real good when we put it out, when it was working. And it helps just slow traffic, deter it. It gives them fair warning. But also having that traffic unit out there to actually, sometimes you got to do it. You got to start handing out citations to the ones that just don't want to slow down. And that's what it takes. Sometimes, not all citations are great, but sometimes you got to do it to prove a point.
Absolutely.
To get the attention. I think just more patrol area, working areas. Call log is the biggest thing. It kind of slows us down from being able to do that sometimes. That's where our traffic division, because that's what they would focus in on. That would be their position besides patrol out here answering the calls. They're working on the speeding, the stop signs, and accidents.
Thank you.
Shane, what are your thoughts on cameras in the downtown area?
I think cameras are big.
Basically filming people, filming the day-to-day activities of everybody in the downtown area.
I don't have a problem with it. I think the cameras would be a good thing. They're gotten to be a commonly used thing in these bigger cities like Mobile and Pensacola. It helps out. It's that extra eye out there that we would have to see if what kind of behavior somebody's actually out here doing on the streets. So they're out there vandalizing one of our flower boxes on the corner of Fairhope section. And dispatch would actually see them kind of things, and they'd be able to let us know before somebody else actually can call it in, would let an officer know it's on the street or just nearby to be able to stop and deter that problem and handle it in the proper manner. I think it'd be a good thing to have.
Okay.
Any further questions?
I got one more, Jack.
Yes, sir.
I meant to ask.
Go ahead.
Police jurisdiction, do you like it the way it is, or you think it needs to be pulled back to city limits?
I like it the way it is. I've never seen a problem with it. I know the people out there enjoy seeing us out there. We get the comments when we do run into them out there. It does make it harder, yes, right now to patrol every bit of it as we'd like, because we are a smaller department, but we are covering a large area. But we've never had a problem going out and answering them calls. At one time, years ago, we didn't go south of 32. And it was taken back at one point, and then it was brought back in. Currently, we're covering 88 square miles roughly, and with a big population between both city and jurisdiction. We are doing it, yes, with 4 to 6 people on a shift. Right now, we are currently short some people, so some shifts are just 5 people out there. And if somebody's off, we're down to 4. And that's where I'd like to see the growth of the patrol division growing, getting bigger, to where we can handle that.
It brings up a pretty tough question and a little bit of a personal question that I have for you. I don't think you currently live in the police jurisdiction.
No, sir, not this time.
If required, would you be willing to move into the police jurisdiction?
Yes.
Any further questions? Okay. Shane, thank you for your time, sir, and we hope to make an announcement on Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Thank you. Oh, let's try
That's
that.
all right.
Thank you.
Mine's still good.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can have the next candidate.
Y'all have a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay. Well, Lieutenant Hollihead, thank you so much for being here and applying for this job. Just some quick instructions and information that you probably know, but I'll just go over again. We are interviewing 4 applicants today. We hoped to be able to name an interim chief as soon as Monday. I won't promise it, but hopefully we will be able to. We're going to hold an executive session after our 4 interviews. And we're going to give the council members time to sleep on it over the weekend and try to make an informed decision. And the interim chief position will be for up to 6 months. In other words, at any time during that 6 months, we may decide to name the interim chief the permanent chief. We also want to give the person that's selected time to evaluate the job themselves. If you were chosen and you served 2-3 months, anytime within that 6-month period, and you decide that the job's not for you, you can go back to your position with no penalty, go right back into the position that you held prior. That is one reason why you will be making the same, if you're chosen, the same pay that you make now for that interim time. We didn't want to raise someone's pay to an interim chief's position, which we don't really have
Right.
a pay grade for that anyway, and then have to cut somebody's pay. Should we decide that you are the interim chief, and then in that 6 months decide that maybe you're not going to be the permanent chief, there's also that possibility that we would put out a call for more applications and interview applicants. So that's the process, and we're telling every candidate, the same thing. So now, do you have any questions about the process?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, all
Thank
right.
you.
We have prepared a list of 14 questions. We're actually going through 10 or 11 of them, and then the additional 3 or 4 are just, if we have time, we'll get to those. And then we're going to also allow council members to ask you questions based upon maybe your responses or questions that they have thought of after we put this list of questions together. So
Okay.
if you don't mind, we'll jump right in, and I'll go ahead and get started with the first question. Lieutenant Hollinghead, what is your vision for the Fairhope Police Department?
My vision is to create an atmosphere within the department where everyone is working harmoniously together within the city. I also want to develop a, excuse me, develop a stronger, let me back up. I want to develop standards that hold everyone accountable. We need expectation. Well, everyone needs to know what the expectation is in our police department. And expectation will have, provide accountability, and between the two of those, we're going to have more success.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Conyers?
Yes, Lieutenant Hollinghead, if you could give us your definition of leadership, and then follow up with an example of a situation where you used your leadership skills to resolve a conflict or a situation.
Okay. Leadership is the ability to inspire people to have the same vision that you have, to move into the same direction. Leadership is not management necessarily. Management's a big part of this job, but leadership, I want the men and women of this department to see what I see, want the same things. And I believe that is the biggest thing of being a great leader. I have been a part of this police department for nearly 13 years now. And my leadership has progressed so much over these 13 years. I feel like that I have led the investigative division into a more structured, developed more of a structured environment to where we can benefit the citizens of the city of Fairhope. I've provided more training opportunities for them. I believe that's taken on a huge role of leadership. It's not about me and me learning the areas that need to be that need to be enhanced. It's me actually giving them the opportunity to take forward, take leadership of their own and develop these skills.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilman Brown?
Yep, thank you, Lieutenant. What are your thoughts on promoting from within the department, both for the interim and the permanent position?
I think that is extremely important. The men and women of our department, we've been through a lot. I feel like we've been through a lot in the last 13 years that I've been there. I've had 5 chiefs in that time, one which was from outside. It is important for our department and our officers to know that they have the ability to move up in our department. Otherwise, what are they working for? they need to know that there is a future for them in our department.
Councilman Boone?
I guess I'm a little more casual. I like Stephanie, if that's okay with you.
That works for me.
Looking back on your career, Stephanie, what event or accomplishment are you most proud of?
I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do with communications. Our communication division, which also known as dispatch, we have made advancements in our, being able to get a working environment that allows them a little bit more of a positive atmosphere. Of course, not everyone's going to be happy with everything that goes on in there, but we've been able to upgrade a lot of things, provide a lot of technology, and that, I believe, has helped promote a more positive atmosphere for them. I'm very proud of that, considering the way it was when I first got here. They had the bare minimum of what they needed to do the job. So that's probably been one of my greatest accomplishments, I feel, since I've been with the police department.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Robinson?
Yes, Lieutenant, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
How would you define the term community policing, and what does that mean to you in a small town like Fairhope?
Community policing is, I guess really to sum it up, is our community, we need to know our community, and our community needs to know us. And I think it's important that we interact with our community by developing community programs that gets us out in the public. Our officers need to be able to relate to what is actually going on in our department or in our city as a whole, and be able to come together with our community to provide solutions to problems.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Lieutenant Hollyhead, if we got into a crunch with the city's budget and we had to make cuts within the police department,
Yes, sir.
you would be the one probably working with others within, working with staff to put together a budget. But let's say that the city council came to you and said, it's been a bad year, we had a storm, we had a natural disaster, we had whatever, and we need to cut the police department budget by 10%. How would you go about accomplishing that?
First of all, I would have to sit down, look at where our money is going, and not necessarily cut from just one area, if possible, not to cut from one area, but maybe to take a little bit from each area that I felt like was cuttable, I guess you would say. And because we're always adding for technology. We're always trying to get vehicles. And even though technology is extremely important in order for us to stay on top of that, to spend the money, it's going to, there are areas that can be budgeted and take a hit to where we can cut that 10%. As I think it would just be an overall, at the time, depending on what year, what we're doing at that time, where would we need to take that? Where would we be able to sacrifice that little bit?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilman Conyers?
Yes. Lieutenant, from a public safety and law enforcement perspective, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing small towns like Fairhope right now?
The biggest challenge from the police department standpoint, predictability. Being able to predict where the next crime is going to take place.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I was going to say communication is also, a big part of that. I think that with the way technology, and I hate to keep going back on technology, but the way technology is moving forward, that we should be able to move into an area where we can provide some type of, be able to predict what is going to happen in the future in our city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
All right. Lieutenant, as far as illegal drugs in our community, what do you see could be done to improve reducing the drug activity both in the community and our schools?
Police presence is going to be a huge area. We need to add, in our schools, definitely, we need to add more police presence in there, and I know that that's something that we are working on putting, and it's already helped tremendously, having our school resource officers in the schools. Education, we've got to educate our community, we've got to educate our kids, the parents. That's going to play a huge part. That's another thing that we're currently working on, is putting together a community outreach to educate our kids, educate the families, educate our public on things to look for, areas that they can try to help others and just withdraw the need for illegal drugs.
Good, thank you. Okay. Councilman Boone.
Stephanie, if you were appointed police chief, how long would you want to stay, or do you have any other aspirations in your police field?
I'm not going anywhere. And I say that, this is really, this was not in my plan when, being the chief of police this soon. I still have many, 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 many years before I can retire, if that's the question you're asking. I have no desire to go anywhere else. I've been here for 13 years. I love Fairhope. Fairhope is my home, and I have no desire to go anywhere. I'm here for the long haul with the men and women of this department.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Robinson.
In your experience, what do you think uniquely qualifies you to be the chief of police in Fairhope?
Again, I've been here 13 years. I think it's important that if you're going to lead a group of people that are in dispatch and patrol and investigations, any aspect of law enforcement, you need to have some general idea of what they do. Mine goes a step further. I have been there. I started in dispatch. I know what dispatchers do. I have compassion for what they do. Same with patrol, investigations. I've worked task force groups. I've worked drugs. I've been on the command staff for 5 years. I've worked with the budget. So I've worked closely with Chief Pettis when he was doing the budget. So I do have a general knowledge of what goes on during this time of the year. Some of the other things that I have a desire to teach, to inspire the men and women of this department to not only be better than what they are, but what they can be. And I want to make sure that, if I'm in this position, I want someone with the same values and the same vision that I have.
Okay.
Thanks.
And thank you for your service
Thank
to the
you.
city of Fairhope and your nearly 20 years in law enforcement, including your time you spent in Mobile as well.
Thank you.
I think that was a valuable experience for
Mhm.
what it's worth. You've touched on several ideas in some of your responses to other questions, but are there any other initiatives or ideas that you have that you would like to share with us today?
Mhm.
Okay.
I believe, talking about the budget and being able to make cuts. Right now, I'm working on with other other staff about how we can generate a little bit more revenue based off things that we are already doing, like our alarm calls. I think that would be extremely important. We're not enforcing our alarm ordinance, and it's not very much, but you think about how many times or how many calls we actually go out and answer alarm calls. And because we don't enforce that, the citizens who have these alarms, if it's broken, we can go out to an alarm 10 times in one night. If it's broken, there's no, consequence to that. We just keep going back to the same alarm time after time and fix it. And I think that by generating or actually enforcing that position or enforcing that ordinance would greatly create or cut down on our response, because we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time doing that. So that's one thing that we're doing or trying to do. 9/11 is coming up, and this goes into the community outreach type thing. On 9/11, instead, in the past, we've always just did a ceremony for 9/11, a brief ceremony with the public can come and the officers who are on duty. And this year we've decided we're going to make a whole week out of it. So it's kind of like a service, 9/11 service. Like one day we'll do a blood drive. One day we're actually going to do that ceremony. But we've got different things, not the whole week is set up yet, but we've got different things that we're planning on trying to implement to get out into the community and get them involved with us into the department. And those are just a couple of things right now that we're working on.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Councilman, we'll open up the floor to other questions. That gets us through the script.
I'd like to ask same question I asked last. We've got 4 great candidates here internally. Obviously, we can't select everybody, so if selected, how would you go about maintaining unity with the 3 that are not selected as well as with the rest of the Fairhope Police Department?
We're going to work together regardless. The 4 individuals, or 3 including myself, that have applied for this position, we all have the same desire, the same vision. And we have all we've talked about this.
Okay.
All right, if you get this, we're still going to support and back each other. We all have a little bit, difference in what we want to do and maybe how we're going to go about doing it. But at the end of the day, our vision is the same, and that is we're going to continue to work. We're going to continue to do things the way that they've been done. We're going to the communication is going to remain open throughout the city, and we're just going to continue to do what we're doing. That is the job.
Okay, thank you.
Lieutenant, right now, with our current hierarchy in the police department, we have a chief and then 3 lieutenants.
Correct.
If you were the chief, would you see changing that in any way? Do you think the current structure is the best way to do it, or what changes or what vision would you have for the I guess the top end of the police department?
The structure that we have, let me back up a minute. I have worked in 3 different police departments, and they have all been structured completely different, simply because of the way, the manpower that we have, or the manpower we had at the time. I do like the structure we currently have. The only benefit to maybe changing and maybe having someone between chief and lieutenant would be in a situation like this. And it would have been easier to make that transition had we had somebody in a captain's position. But the 3 lieutenants share the responsibilities of the department, and we work very well together. And we have for the 5 years that I've been in the command position for the lieutenant. And there are pros and cons, I believe, to both. If you look at it, you're kind of like, you've got the 3 lieutenants, you've got a chief up here, as long as you maintain a communication between the 3 lieutenants and your chief, everything will flow really well. But sometimes when our previous administration, when we had a captain or we had an assistant chief, we kind of it was like a bottleneck. It got stuck right here. And a lot of the communication stopped right there with that person. And that was a downfall, I felt like at that time. But I don't think that either is going to would be bad. It's about the communication. It's being able to funnel it up, funnel it down, and everything will go smooth. So I guess to answer your question, I'm good with both. I really am. What we do now works, but I can see where having someone in between would definitely benefit the department as a whole.
I'm going to do a follow-up to that. If you have someone in between, it's not appointed by the council, and they appear to be, say they're an assistant chief or a captain, and they appear to be the heir apparent to chief, but that's not the candidate's choice. It gets pretty awkward, too, when you go to name an interim chief or a police chief.
It does. I mean, and it wouldn't
Would you agree with
necessarily.
that?
I do. I agree with that. And it wouldn't necessarily be that person would have actually got the position, but it would have been an easier transition. It wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been where we had to do it overnight. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so, but
Okay.
it works.
Okay.
All right, Lieutenant, downtown safety of both pedestrians and traffic has been a kind of a high priority to me. I've talked to the mayor and some of the people within the staff. As a police chief, public safety is number one. Who do you see as a driving force about achieving results on calming the traffic in downtown, and what ideas might you have that would help that?
That's not going to be a one-person job. That's definitely going to be something that the chief, the mayor, the council are all going to have to put their heads together and come up with some idea or some ideas to move forward with. We're either going to have to construct some type of parking garage maybe, or we're going to have to develop some type of additional parking. We're running out of space. We're definitely running out of space of parking. The traffic downtown is definitely getting an area of concern. I can see that. But it's not going to be just one person being able to make that change. It's going to take all of us to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else?
I got one more question.
Yes, sir.
Police jurisdiction. You think it's okay the way it is? Would you prefer to pull it back to the city limits?
I currently like it the way it is. If we pull, it gives us a kind of a buffer between the city and what's in the county. We're able to stop whatever is taking place, or stop. You've got your boundary. You've got your city limits, and us actually being able to patrol that area out in the jurisdictions, we're able to stop more from coming into our city directly. I like the jurisdiction for that reason. So then that would be my preference, but it's not my decision at this time.
Thank you.
I want to follow up with that, in fairness to everyone. I believe you are not a resident of the police, the city nor in the police jurisdiction, although you could argue that you live closer to the station than some officers do. If you were required to live within the police jurisdiction, would you be willing to relocate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I've already discussed that. I've already made that decision.
Over the years, it's been a requirement. It's not been a requirement. If you look back in Fairhope's history, it's been both.
Well, it's only fair. I mean, why would you not live in the city that you, I mean, it's never been an issue for me up till now, because this is a big decision, but you would want your police chief living within your jurisdiction.
And if I can quote you on your answer to number 5, we need to relate to what's happening in our city.
That's it.
I think by living in, you can do more. Just my personal
Exactly.
thought.
You see more, you can do more.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank
All
you
right.
for your time.
Well, thank you.
If you wouldn't mind doing us a favor and telling them that, if you'll send Officer Sawyer
I will.
over now, and then if you would let Officer Joyner know that she'll follow about, looks like we're running at about 40 minutes per interview.
Okay, all right, I'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Yes,
very
ma'am.
much.
Stephanie,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Have a good day.
Yep,
Let me
I'm
do this
sorry.
now.
I know,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
The water takes right care of some idiots.
Sorry.
Let's take a shower and just drill
You don't have water.
If it means something evil.
I had that. I lived at Fairhope. The water tank's on the top of the hill. I'm literally 90
Great.
feet.
You want to have a seat?
Okay. Ground elevation. And I had to put a
Thank you
raise
for
you're talking
being
110
prepared
pounds
a
of
little
pressure.
early.
Yes, sir.
We originally scheduled the interviews an hour apart. We didn't know
understand.
exactly how long it would take to ask and answer these questions.
sir.
But now that we have a good idea, we kind of,
We do a lot of interviews for new
Compressed.
hires, and sometimes they go slow, sometimes they go quick. It's just, got to be ready.
right. Well, first of all, thank you for your 20-plus years of service
Yes,
to
sir.
the city of Fairhope. Also, for your service to our country prior to that. And I know that you also spent time as a law enforcement officer on the West Coast.
Yes, sir.
A little bit about the process is that we will interview 4 candidates today. You are the third of the 4. We will name an interim chief as soon as Monday.
Yes, sir.
We may or may not, once the council members have time to consider the candidates' answers and sleep on this over the weekend, we hope to be able to name one on Monday. That being said, the interim chief will serve for a period of time up to 6 months. That will give the council time to evaluate the job that the chief is doing, and also the interim chief the time to evaluate whether or not they want to do the job.
Yes, sir.
If you were named interim chief and you decided, for whatever reason, it's not for you, you could simply go back to your prior position.
Yes, sir.
With no penalty whatsoever, which brings to mind the pay, if you're elected interim chief, will stay the same
Yes, sir.
until such time that you may be appointed permanent chief, and that's to keep from having to cut your pay
Correct.
if you decide you don't want to perform the duties, or if we decide to choose someone else.
Yes, sir.
If anytime within the 6 months we determine that you would be the fit for the permanent police chief, we could name you as permanent police chief at any time within those
Yes, sir.
6 months. If we determine that you are not the candidate, you would serve up to 6 months, and we would put out a call for applications to
Right.
interview once again. So do you have any questions about the process?
No, sir. The process was explained to us prior to us putting in the application, so I think all of the candidates understand what we're facing.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we have prepared a list of questions that we're asking each candidate. We will have a portion of the interview at the end in which council members may ask you additional questions based upon your previous responses, or questions that they may have thought of since we put this list of questions together, or it may be unique to just you.
Right.
So if you don't mind, we'll just jump right
Yes, sir.
in, and I will ask the first question and ask you, what is your vision for the Fairhope Police Department?
My vision for the Fairhope Police Department is to return it to the status where it was 20 years ago when I started. When I started in 1998 with the Fairhope Police Department, we were widely respected throughout the state as the place where law enforcement officers wanted to spend their career. Traveling with the high school early in my career to away games throughout the state, it was not unusual for law enforcement officers that we met at that venue to give us a business card or an email address or a phone number and asked us to contact them when we were hiring because they wanted to come to work here. For various reasons, over the past 2 decades, that has changed. We are no longer seen as the primary go-to place in Alabama any longer. And I am reluctant to say this, but we've become a laughingstock. This agency now, when we go around the state, other officers who know about us simply laugh and say, I'm glad I'm not working in Fairhope. So my vision is to return us to where we were 20 years ago, to get our status back to where it should be. This community deserves a law enforcement agency that is respected throughout the state, that has the ability to attract qualified candidates from throughout the state and honestly nationwide. I'll use myself as an example. When I came here from California, I could have gone literally almost anywhere in the United States. I chose Fairhope because this is where I wanted to raise my family. I chose the Fairhope Police Department because it was where I wanted to spend my career based on the reputation that I learned about when I researched Gulf Coast law enforcement agencies. I wanted to get back to that. Our officers deserve that. Our community deserves that.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Conyers.
Yes, sir. Officer Sawyer, if you would, give us your definition of leadership and then follow up with an example of a situation where you've used your leadership skills to resolve a problem or issue.
Leadership is an individual's ability to motivate and cause others to follow his examples. A leader is somebody who knows how to manage as well as how to motivate. A leader is someone who is there at the forefront in all situations. We all know the old saying, lead by example. A leader is also somebody who has the knowledge, the ability, and the willingness to jump in to do any job that is required of his subordinates. In my time in Fairhope, I have literally performed every job description that we have in that building. So I know that I can jump into any job description at any time to either lead, mentor, or perform that particular job. There have been examples of leadership for myself. When we were asked to start a SWAT team, myself and a couple other officers took that job on, and we formed a successful SWAT team. We had a visiting dignitary, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Britain. She visited, and we were expecting her to have a full contingent of security to take care of her at the Grand Hotel during her visit. The day before she arrived, we met with her we met with her one security officer who told us that we were mistaken. She was coming with only 2 British police officers, and they expected us to handle all security at the Grand Hotel. At the time, the person in charge of that event was Chris Browning, our former chief of police. He looked at me and said, Craig, you've got 24 hours to plan for a 3-day visit from a visiting dignitary to include round-the-clock security. Every aspect that has to be taken care of is your responsibility. I took on that responsibility. I did it well. Her visit was a success, and no complaints as far as the Fairhope Police Department was concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
All right. Thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What are your thoughts on promoting from within the department, both for an interim position and permanent chief?
I think it's a good idea simply because we do have people within who can fill that job. It's important for the officers who have spent their careers here to know that they have the ability to move up and to be promoted. Most of our officers start with this agency with that goal of moving up in rank and eventually having the ability to lead. Hiring from the outside sometimes would be the right thing to do, but in this situation, not to pat myself on the back, but I think I'm the right person for the job. So promoting me to this position would be a good quality decision by this council. We have gone to the outside before. Bill Press was a good police officer. We did not see eye to eye on a lot of situations. He had a big agency vision. He was not able to mold that into a small agency reality that we have here in Fairhope. So I think we need somebody that we can promote from within that understands our community, understands our agency, and understands the unique challenges that our department is facing right now.
Thank you.
Councilman Boone.
Craig, looking back on your career, what event or accomplishment are you most proud of?
In 2000, I responded to a domestic violence call. The suspect was mentally ill. He was off his medication, and he fought us. We got into a fight in his front yard, and during that fight, I injured an artery in my neck. Didn't know that it was injured. A few days later, it caused a stroke. This stroke took the use of most of my right hand and the right side of my body. I was told I would never walk again. I spoke to our chief at the time about retiring, about taking some sort of disability retirement, and that was where we were going to go with that. I was watching a television show on cops, and I saw that there was a police officer on active duty with a prosthetic leg. He had lost his leg in the line of duty and returned to full duty. So I went to Chief Browning, and I said, if I can do that, if I can do everything that's required of a recruit police officer, but do it left-handed, will you let me keep my badge and my gun? He said, yes, I will. So I had to teach myself to write left-handed, to shoot left-handed, to type left-handed. Every skill that we require of our police officers when we hire them, I had to teach myself to do that left-handed because I used to be a right-handed officer. I was able to do that. Now, when we go out to the shooting range, I am one of the top shots on our agency doing it left-handed. And I'm extremely proud of the fact that my level of commitment to this agency and to this community saw me through that challenge. I was awarded the Law Enforcement Purple Heart for wounds received in the line of duty. And as far as the highlight of my career, that is what I would point to.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
Councilman Robinson.
Yes, sir. Officer Sawyer, thank you for being
Yes, sir.
here.
Thank you.
You know, in a small town like Fairhope, I'd like to ask you what your definition of community policing is, and then I'd like to ask you how you would go about implementing community policing in Fairhope.
Community policing started decades ago. It is something that I began studying back when I was a military policeman back as far as the 80s. It means simply being responsible for your area of your community, knowing the specific problems of your area of responsibility, and knowing the people who either work or live in that area. My last agency, we were assigned to a beat, meaning that it was a specific geographic zone that you were responsible for patrolling. We were held responsible for that area. If something happened in our area, we should have known about it or handled that problem. We know who lives there, we know the business owners, we know the people who work there, we know the routines, we know the pattern of life in that area. Community policing means that you take ownership of your specific geographic zone and you're responsible for what happens there. And what was the second part of your question, sir?
How would you go about implementing that in Fairhope?
Going about implementing that, I would implement for the Fairhope Police Department patrol zones. Right now, we have 6 patrol officers who hit the street and they go literally wherever they want within 88 square miles of our jurisdiction. I would limit them to a specific patrol zone, give them the responsibility of knowing what's happening in that area and knowing the people within that area, so that when there is a problem, I go to that beat officer or to that zone officer and ask him, what is the problem, what are your suggestions for taking care of it, and how can we fix this problem? Put the responsibility on the officer. Officers crave that type of responsibility and those leadership opportunities, and I think we should give it to them.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Officer Sawyer, God forbid we run into this situation anytime soon, but it's happened in the past and we could run into it again in the future. But let's say the city faces some revenue shortage and as you're preparing your budget, the city council asks you to find a way to reduce the police department budget by 10%. How would you go about accomplishing that?
One of the easiest ways to reduce the budget would be our vehicle expenditures. We spend a lot on police vehicles so that our officers can have take-home cars. That is a huge benefit because when we do have an emergency, a quick phone call will get an officer in uniform on duty on the street within about 10 or 15 minutes. So it is good for us to have those take-home cars, but a lot of police departments accomplish their goals by sharing cars. So we could cut our fleet, potentially, share cars, and still accomplish our goals of providing an effective law enforcement presence within our community.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Councilman Conyers?
Yes, from a public safety perspective and law enforcement perspective, what is the biggest challenge facing Fairhope today?
The biggest challenge facing Fairhope today is that law enforcement is being asked to perform tasks that never should have been handed to law enforcement. We have generations of younger persons coming into society who have never been parented. They have no respect for authority, no respect for themselves or for others, and no desire to follow the rules. That is something that traditionally family groups have instilled in their youngers, and now it's being given to us. We're being asked to basically parent the children of this community. And that's not what it should be. We should be focused solely on police work, not on parenting work.
Councilman Brown.
Along those same lines, in regards to illegal drugs, what do you see can be done more to reduce the illegal drugs in our community and our schools?
We are seeing an increase in methamphetamines. This is a plague that hit us in California when I was there, and we're seeing an increase in possession and influence of methamphetamines. First, we need to make sure our officers are up to date on their training on methamphetamines beyond what we usually get with the clandestine labs. We are taught how to handle the labs, but we don't have a whole lot of training on handling the specific problems that a user would experience, specifically the paranoia and the delusions. We need to train our officers better on how to handle those situations, on how to recognize methamphetamine, and we need to start a public education program. A law enforcement agency out west started a program called Faces of Meth, where they would take mug shots of persons who have been arrested for methamphetamines over a period of years and put them out to the public to show them this is what you would used to look like. This is what you're going to look like after 4 or 5 years of methamphetamine use. Public education will go a long way to stopping that. As far as the drugs in the school, we actually do have an officer going to DARE training right now. One of our investigators, or actually one of our school resource officers, Bunky Bishop, is in DARE school right now. And I have heard ups and downs about the DARE program. I recently spoke to somebody who's a former DARE officer, and they gave me a new vision into it. So I'm excited to have Bunky come back with his DARE training in our schools to help us with that threat.
Thank you.
Councilman Boone.
Greg, if you're appointed chief, how long do you plan to be the police chief, and what further career aspirations do you have?
If I was appointed the chief of police, I would stay for as long as I was wanted. If it got to the point where I was inhibiting the effective policing of this community, either due to friction with the mayor's office or due to friction with the council itself, I would have to reconsider my goals. My goal as it stands right now is to finish my career here with the Fairhope Police Department. My wife is a school teacher here. We both will be retiring at about the same time. Our goal is to retire young enough to be able to enjoy that retirement. If I'm appointed the chief of police, I know that I'm the right person to do the job for you, and I will stay for as long as I can do it successfully.
Thank you.
Councilman Robinson.
Yes, sir. Based on your experience, Officer Sawyer, what do you think uniquely qualifies you to be the chief of police in Fairhope?
Because I've been preparing for this job literally my entire adult life. At the age of 17, I joined the military. I volunteered for student leadership positions. I volunteered for overseas duty. My job in the military was law enforcement specialist, where I formed a strong and solid foundation in modern law enforcement. I volunteered for a tour of duty in the Persian Gulf during the first Gulf War. As a sergeant and a graduate of the non-commissioned officers preparatory school, I was placed in the leadership role over other enlisted personnel in a battle time condition. After that, I could have gone almost anywhere. I chose to go to San Jose, California, because that was one of the leading law enforcement agencies in the nation. In fact, most police departments nationwide and even worldwide in some instances rely on the San Jose training model. So if you go to a police department and ask them what their training model is, more often than not, you will hear them refer to the San Jose model. I went there specifically to get experience and training under my belt. While I was there, I volunteered in the gang and drug unit, focused law enforcement activities in what you call a high crime area. I was a field training officer, and I was also one of the first school resource officers. I took that training, brought it here to Fairhope, and consecutively and continuously, I have sought out leadership positions, sought out abilities to take my training and my experience to better the law enforcement service to this community, and done everything that I can to be a good role model for the other officers and for this community. In my off-duty time, I attend First Baptist Church. I volunteer within the children's ministry. I take kids to summer camp, I teach Sunday school, and I teach a missions class for boys on Wednesday evenings. I am well respected within the church. Community members who know me and know my ethics respect me and expect me to perform at a higher level than some of the other officers here. So as to why I would be good for this job, I have literally been preparing for this for 31 years.
Thanks, sir.
Officer Sawyer, this is the last question before we open up to just general questions. What other initiatives or ideas do you have that you'd like to share with us? Just be as broad as you would like.
At one point, we had a crime suppression team. I would like to see that reinstated. I would like to see us, as I said earlier, go to a patrol zone model of policing so that we have officers literally spread around our jurisdiction. I have seen officers get dispatched to a call at Publix and they're responding from the airport. I have seen officers get dispatched to a call at Walmart and they're responding from the Grand Hotel. That is too long of a response time. We can shut that down by keeping them in a zone. When we respond with our lights and sirens, going that distance just increases our liability. I would also like to get back to more of a focused accountability as far as our policies. Our policies come from either the Department of Justice or from Travelers Insurance, who is our liability insurance provider. They give us the policies. It is a national standard that we are expected to follow, and we have had some failures in that area in the past 5 years. And that is something that we need to get back to as far as reducing liability for ourselves and for the community by following the policies that we're given. I would like to see us continue our training program. Our officers do have access to some high-quality training to advance their careers, and I would like us to see a more focused attention on recruiting, both local officers who were born and raised here, as well as officers who bring experience from other agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'll open the floor. Councilman Conyers, I believe you've probably been pretty consistent. You have a question?
I do, and I would like to ask the same question and tweak it slightly based on some of your responses earlier. As I mentioned in the past to candidates, we got 4 qualified individuals that are applying for this position. We appreciate all of your service. Only one person is going to be able to be selected. What would you do to maintain the unity within the police department if you were the one selected? And also in the patrol zones, to piggyback on that, I assume that if you put Fairhope on a grid and divided into 6 patrol zones, some would be deemed more favorable than others. How would you maintain the unity and camaraderie if someone is, say, selected for the less desirable patrol zone versus the other? Because I guess if you want them to stay in that unit, they're going to stay in that zone for a while.
Right.
So.
To answer the first question, as far as morale and unity within the police department, that will depend on the officer. We have some officers who have known for literally decades that will fit right in to whatever chief of police is here because they're a professional and they will do their jobs regardless of who their leader is. We have some officers that we have learned will buck the system, for lack of a better word. They simply want to do it the way they have always done it, and you work with your chain of command to influence them, to show them that this is the right way to do it, this is the way that you can reduce liability to the city, the agency, and to yourself, and by building morale. Morale within a police department is generally built by accountability, by showing them what the rules are, letting them know that they have to follow the rules, and then letting them do their jobs without micromanagement. So as far as the unity, it's simply a matter of letting them know that we're there for them. We want them to do their jobs. We want to support them in their job performance. As for the patrol zones, that's a national standard. Even the agencies around us in Baldwin County have patrol zones. It's called beat integrity. Some of them are more desirable. To identify a patrol zone, that's going to take a sit down with basically all of our department leadership and our officers to decide how would we define those patrol zones. Usually you choose your patrol zone based on seniority. If you're the senior most officer on a shift, you get to pick your zone. That means that the junior most officer may get a zone that he doesn't necessarily want, but eventually with time, he builds up seniority. He'll have a chance to go for the zone that he wants.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Along those same,
I was just saying the floor is open. Go ahead.
Yeah, along those same lines of zones, what's your position on the police jurisdiction?
The police jurisdiction, we cover 88 square miles. The officers like the variety. The officers like the ability to either work in town or to go out to some of the other areas. We have a lot of drugs moving up and down State Highway 181. We have some officers who are very good at finding those drugs. On a weekly basis, we're seeing multiple methamphetamine arrests coming from traffic stops, a lot of them out on State Highway 181. The jurisdiction, there's pros and cons to it. It is our family, it is our friends, it's our neighbors that live out there in Barnwell and in Point Clear, that because they're outside of the city limits, we could pull back to just the city limits and let the sheriff's department take care of that. I have a great deal of respect for the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office, but they cannot provide the level of police presence in our jurisdiction that we can. My vote would be to keep our jurisdiction the way that it is. I have presented plans to the mayor to hire more officers so that we could continue to cover those areas and encourage those areas to incorporate then into the city limits as they see fit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Officer Sawyer, I'd like to ask you, if you were to be the interim police chief, what is your vision for the hierarchy of the way the police department is set up? You know, right now we have a chief and 3 lieutenants. In your opinion, is that the most efficient way to do this, or do you have other ideas or as to what might be best?
I have had some other ideas. I don't know who the other candidates are, and I don't know if giving an answer to that in this forum would be productive. There are some changes where we are a little bit top-heavy. We do have some sergeants who are not filling sergeants' positions. We have lieutenants who are not filling lieutenants' positions. They each have their own leadership style, some more effective than others. Chief Pettis and I had different leadership styles, and so we do need to restructure our police department so that we're not quite so top-heavy, and where each supervisor has what we call in law enforcement a span of control. The span of control for each supervisor should be such that he can be an effective leader, so that he understands what's going on underneath him with his subordinates and can help them do their jobs. Yet there are some changes I would like to make, and I'm sorry I can't answer that more fully. But again, you know, I think it would be harmful to morale internally if I was to start talking about making changes at this point.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anyone else? Robert, Kevin?
I'm good.
That concludes our interview. We thank you for your
Sir,
time.
thank you.
Thank you for your candor, and hopefully we'll make a decision on Monday.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I hope that you have had a chance to read my resume and my application. And if you speak to the references I listed on my resume, I think you'll see that I am the most qualified candidate for this position internally.
I don't know about that Jerry Henry fellow you listed.
Well, he'll have a lot of good things to say about me. He really will, as will Judge Bishop and Mark Stayskull.
Okay.
All right?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I
All
appreciate
right.
it. Yes, sir. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Appreciate it.
We had to pull you off the street today?
No, I was actually at home getting ready.
Well, thank you for being here, Officer Joyner, and thank you for applying for the interim chief's position, just so that you're fully aware of what the process is. I'll go over it and ask you at the end if you have any questions about just the process. So we have 4 applicants that have applied for the interim chief position. You are the 4th of 4 to be interviewed today. We hope to be able to make an announcement by Monday at the council meeting. I cannot promise that. There may be people that want to take more time. We're going to have an executive session after your interview, in fact, and then hopefully by Monday we'll be able to name an interim chief. The interim chief will serve for a period of, from the time they start up to 6 months, but not to exceed 6 months. If you're selected as interim chief, we may, anytime during that 6 months, decide to appoint you as permanent chief. But the 6-month interim period is designed to give us an opportunity to evaluate your job as police chief, and it also gives you an opportunity to evaluate how much you would like being police chief. If you were selected and if you decided sometimes within that 6 months that the job was not for you, you could go back to your former position with no penalty, no questions asked whatsoever. That is one reason why, if you are selected interim police chief, that your salary will not be bumped up to police chief, and we honestly don't have an interim police chief salary. So, you know, forgive us for that, but that was the reason for doing it that way. Do you have any questions so far about the process?
No, sir.
Okay. If in the 6-month time period, the council was to decide that that the interim chief is not the correct person for the police chief's position, we would open that position back up to further applicants. And also, if the interim chief decided it wasn't the job for them, we would open up the process again and interview for the position of permanent police chief.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did I miss anything, council?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So we have a set of prepared questions for you, and we're just going to rotate between the council members just to make it simple. If you, council members, if you don't mind, I'll ask the questions submitted by Councilman Robinson just to be consistent. Understand that Councilman Robinson got called into court, didn't have a choice, but while this is not being live streamed, he will be able to view your video so that he will know exactly how you answered in your own words each question. He won't rely on our notes or our word as to how. And these would be the questions that he submitted. I'll be asking his questions
Yes, sir.
as well. So we'll jump right into those, if you don't mind. At the end of approximately 10 or 11 questions, we'll open up the floor to council members to ask you additional questions that may have been prompted by some of your responses during the interview, or may have been prompted by questions that they thought of that might be unique to you since the time that we came up with this list of questions. So I'll just jump in and say, Officer Joyner, what is your vision for the Fairhope Police Department?
I would like us to be the department that we used to be, where every officer in the whole county wanted a job here. You would have 500 or 600 applicants for one spot, and that's just not the case right now, and I would like to see it like it used to be, a well sought-after position.
Okay, excellent. Councilman Conyers.
Yes. Would you please give us your definition of leadership and then follow up with an example of a time where you're able to use your leadership skills to either resolve a situation or any type of issue?
I think good leadership, you have to show, you know, the people that are working under you what kind of job you expect them to do. If you're not doing the job, you can't expect them to do the job. And throughout my career, there's, you know, plenty of opportunities I could share with you. I was a field training officer. You know, you have another officer in the vehicle with you, you're training, and what you do out there on the street, they see that, and they're going to reflect that when they're by themselves. If you don't teach them well, they're not going to do that well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
Thank you for being here today. What are your thoughts on promoting from within the department, both for the interim and the full-time chief position?
As far as the interim position, I think it's appropriate. Most departments do pull an interim from internally. As far as the chief, you know, cities have gone both ways, outside and inside. I feel like it at least should be looked at internally. If you have qualified applicants, they should be given the opportunity to apply just like everyone else.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Boone.
Julie, looking back on your career, what event or accomplishment are you most proud of?
Getting in law enforcement, I think, is my biggest one. Back when I started in 1992, I put myself through the academy because females in 92, you could hardly get a job in law enforcement in Baldwin County. I think there was 3 females when I started. And back then, you could put yourself through the academy. I was a student at Faulkner, and I went to the academy on weekends, worked, went to school full-time, and got married all in a year. So I think that was my biggest accomplishment, putting myself through the academy.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Excellent. And this question was originally from Councilman Robinson. I'll ask it for him. What does the term community policing mean to you, and how would you implement community policing?
I think community policing is just being open to the public. You know, if you're out walking down the street and someone wants to talk to you, stop and talk to them. If they ask for directions, give them directions. Being out there and seeing, the last 2 weeks we've been at the schools, all the administrators have been assigned to the school. There's plenty of parents sitting in car line waiting at, 2:45 that have, rolled their window down. We're so glad you're at the school. We're so glad you're here. And stopping and talking to those parents means a lot to them.
Okay, thank you. And this question is from me. If we have revenue shortfalls within the city and the council ask the police chief to find a way to reduce the police department budget by 10%, how would you go about accomplishing that?
I think you would have to really crack down on overtime would be one of the things. But that goes back to special events and things that cause us to have overtime. Looking at the overtime would be, I think, the biggest way to increase or decrease the budget.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Conyers.
Yes, Officer Joyner, from a public safety and law enforcement perspective, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Fairhope today?
The influx of people. We have got so many new subdivisions, so many more people moving in, so many businesses moving into downtown. The traffic is becoming an issue, but I think just the influx of people is going to be the biggest challenge.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
So illegal drugs within our community, both community and in the schools, what do you believe could be done more to reduce that?
I know that Officer Bishop is currently at DARE training, which I think is a big impact. I taught DARE for a lot of years. It doesn't alleviate all drug use, but it does educate younger children because we're seeing a younger and younger trend of kids using drugs. More middle school age starting to use before high school. When we were growing up, that was not the case. It was high school. I think that's a big part of it. A lot of traffic stops looking specifically for those drugs, trying to get them off the street.
Thank you.
Councilman Boone.
And I hope I'm a little more impersonal, everybody, so I hope you don't mind me saying this, calling you Julie, but
That's fine.
if appointed, how long do you plan on being the police chief, and what further career aspirations do you have?
I would like to work at least 8 more years in law enforcement. And that's give or take depending on how things go and, family situation, but I would like to work 8 more years.
Okay. And this question came from Councilman Robinson. It said, based on your experiences, what do you think uniquely qualifies you to be the police chief of Fairhope?
I've already been an interim chief for 11 months. I've been to the new chief's training. I've been to executive level training. And I would say uniquely among my 3 other applicants, I'm the only one that has that.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Conyers?
Yes, let's see. I've been asking that. If you were appointed, we've got 4 good candidates. Obviously, we can only appoint 1 person. If you were appointed, how would you go about maintaining the unity within the police department? And what did you do, I guess, as interim chief in Alberta, I believe, correct?
Yes.
To maintain unity if you were obviously selected from among your other peers at that group?
One of the things I would like to do is I'd like to talk to each employee individually and see what their vision for the department would be, see what things that they would like to incorporate, things that they don't like that would like to change. Not that I would take all their suggestions and use all of them, but I would at least like to know where their thoughts are. And I think if you include all the employees, they feel like it's unified if you're including them in decision-making, or at least using their, thoughts in making decisions for the department.
Thank you.
I'll go back to this is one of my original questions. It's kind of segue off of what you just said. You asked about others' ideas, and I appreciate that very much. But what other initiatives or ideas do you have, and be specific where you can be?
As far as the department goes?
As far as the department, yes.
Well, I would like to see us, more together as far as other departments. The squads have get-togethers, and they feel more like a family. And I feel like we've lost that a little bit. So I'd really like to see that happen. But that requires a little initiative on all the leaders in the department, not just the chief.
Okay. Other questions, council?
Yeah, so downtown, as a chief, public safety is number one priority. In downtown, as you know, as you mentioned, traffic is only going to get worse.
It is.
I think it's a matter of time before we have a serious incident in downtown Fairhope, whether it's a pedestrian vehicle or two vehicles having an accident. In your mind, in your vision, who leads that charge in addressing that? Is it the chief, the mayor, the council? Is it all three? And do you have any ideas to help curtail the issue of traffic down? Not when I say traffic, I'm talking about more speeding in downtown, not parking.
I think it has to be all three. I think the mayor and the council and the chief have to all work together to alleviate the problem. The chief can't make those decisions by himself, can't change certain things that would help the situation. The mayor and council, without the chief and the officers' help, can't change it either. So I think it's an effort that all three would have to make. I think some of the things that we could help with, which I know we have a real issue with pulling out of our department, with the way the parking is right in front of our police department. And I look for that to be a real accident waiting to happen. I think we really need to move our parking back a little bit so that we can see. With all the delivery trucks parked in the middle of the road in that turn lane, it does cause an issue sometimes during the day. And if we're going to emergency call, someone might not see us around that delivery truck, and that can be a real issue. So that's one of the things I think needs to be addressed.
I'm going to try not to butcher Jay's question. It wasn't one that was prepared, so it's not written down, just kind of paraphrasing. He's asked this of every candidate, so I'll ask it again. And help me out, Councilman, if I get it wrong. But he wanted to know your opinion of the current hierarchy of the police department as it relates to the upper echelon, if you will, the current arrangement of chief and lieutenants. Do you see the need to change that, and what would be your vision for that? Did I get that about right, Council?
Yep. Just the structure there.
The structure.
I think there needs to be someone in the middle between the lieutenants and the chief, whether you call that person a captain or an assistant chief. I don't think that's really relevant one way or the other. But I do think there needs to be someone, to kind of be a buffer to, listen to what the lieutenants have to say and kind of help if the chief is out to, run things when the chief's not there. I know currently, one of the lieutenants is assigned that position, but then, then we have to remember, hey, who's in charge this week? If you had a captain or assistant chief, there wouldn't be a question as to who that person would be.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilman Brown, I believe there's another question you've been asking.
And one more question. There's been talk about the police jurisdiction, leaving it as it is or pulling it back to city limits. What's your vision for the police jurisdiction if you were chief?
I'm a proponent for having the jurisdiction, but that's because it's a buffer for that drug activity. Those people moving heroin and meth, don't really come into the city limits. But as you pull back and you're less visible out in that jurisdiction, they're going to get closer and closer to where you are in the city limits. So that would be a reason I would want to keep the jurisdiction. I understand manpower is an issue, so if the manpower is just not there to do that full jurisdiction, I could see pulling back to a half a jurisdiction, but of course that has to go along with what the sheriff's department can do and them actually being able to hire the officers to cover that extra area. But as far as the crime, I think, having that buffer to the city limits is important.
Thank you. Councilman, any further questions?
I don't think I finished your answer either about what I did in Alberta.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, that's all right. If you want to.
Go ahead.
I was interim chief for 11 months after the situation with the previous chief, and I did the budget that year. We ordered cars, ordered equipment. During that time, I actually had to discipline some officers and actually had to fire an officer. So, I have made those hard decisions with such a small department. You're very close, very good friends, and, it hurt. But you got to do what you got to do when you're in charge. So.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Councilman? Okay. All right. We thank you.
Sir.
Thank
I
you for your
appreciate it.
service. Yes.
Thank you.
Request the city council go into executive session based on Alabama code to discuss the general reputation and character, physical condition, and professional competence or mental health of individuals, or to discuss the job performance of certain public employees that are not appointed or required to file a statement of economic interest with the Alabama Ethics Commission. As city attorney, I hereby request the city council of the city of Fairhope rise from regular city council meeting on Friday, August 24, 2018, to go into executive session. The city council shall be in executive session for approximately, I'm going to say, 20 minutes. At the end of the executive session, the city council shall return to the city council chambers to resume the regular city council meeting. May I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Okay, for the public that's here, I can tell you that once we come back, we will simply make a motion to adjourn. I do not see us taking any further action in this meeting. There will be no resolutions considered. So if you want to go about your business, and feel confident that we're not going to conduct any business when we come back. Okay? Thank you. Adjournment?
So moved.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.